All right. Well, welcome to the third session of Unlocking Engineering Productivity. This is Kovid, your host. And with me today, we have two amazing, passionate engineering leaders, Clint and Rens. So I'll introduce them one by one. Let's go ahead. Clint, he's the Senior Director of Engineering at Contentsquare, ex Hotjar, uh, a longtime friend and a mentor. Welcome to the show, Clint. It is great to have you here.
Thank you, Kovid. It's very exciting to be here. Thank you for the invite.
All right. So, Clint, I think we were talking about your hobbies last time, and I was really fascinated by the fact. So, guys, Clint is actually training in martial arts. He's very well trained professional martial art player, and he's particularly more interested in karate. Is it right, Clint?
Yes, indeed. It's I wouldn't say like professionally. We've been at it for 2 years, me and the kids. But yes, it's grown on me. I enjoy it.
Perfect. What else do you like? Would you like to share something about your hobbies and passions?
Yeah, I'm pretty much into on the more movement side. I'm into sports in general, like fit training, and I enjoy a game of squash here and there. And then on the calmer side, I need my daily dose of reading. It varies. Sometimes it's around leadership, sometimes psychology. Lately, it's a bit more also into stoicism and the art of controlling. Thinking about what we can control. Yeah, that's me basically.
That's great. Really interesting. Um, the another guest that we have today, we have Rens with us. Rens is CTO of Prendio. He's also a Typo product user and a product champion. He has been guiding us throughout on building the product so far. Welcome to the show, Rens.
Hi, COVID. No, it's good to be here. Clint, good to really meet you. Yeah, excited to participate, and it's always really good to talk shop. I enjoy it.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. All right, Rens, would you like to tell us something about your hobbies? How do you unwind your day? What do you do outside of work?
Yeah, no, it's funny. I don't have many. I don't think I have many hobbies anymore. I mean, I have two young kids now, and they take up their hobbies are my hobbies. So gymnastics, soccer. Um, we have other a lot of different sports things and piano. So I've learning. I'm learning piano with my daughter. I guess that's a hobby. I'm kind of being
That's
forced
great.
to, not forced to, but I'm enjoying it. But I think a lot of their things that they do become stuff that I get involved in, and I try to enjoy it with them as well. It makes it more fun.
No, I can totally understand that because having two kids and being in a CTO position, I think all your time would be consumed outside of work by the kids. That's totally fine, and if your hobbies are aligned with what your kids are doing, that's good for them and good for you.
Yeah, no, I think it's I love it. I enjoy it. It keeps me. I always say, I think I remember learning a long time ago. Someone said that, how you when you get older, life goes by faster because you kept on doing the same stuff every day, and your mind just samples less, right? So like they kind of keep me young. I get to do new stuff with through them, so it's been good.
Perfect, perfect. Um, Thanks for the introduction. We got to know you a little more, but that doesn't stop here. Uh, Clint, you were talking about psychology, reading those books. There is one small ritual on this show that is again driven from my love for psychology, understanding human behavior and everything. So the ritual is basically that you have to tell something about yourself from your childhood, from your teenage, that defines you who you are today.
Very interesting question. It reminds me of a previous manager I used to have. Used to like
Okay.
asking this question as well. I think there was a recent one which we just mentioned. We're mentioning kids, Rents. You got me to it. The fact that I actually started training martial arts because of the kids. I took them and I ended up doing it myself. So it was one of those. But I think the biggest one that comes to mind was um, in 2005, at the age of 22. In Malta, we're a very tightly knit culture. Um, People, stay living with their parents long. We're a small island, everyone is close by. So I wanted to see what's out there. So I went to live for a year in Germany. Um, and I think this was the most defining moment because for two fronts. On one side, it was a career opportunity where whilst I was still studying so for software engineering part time, there was this company that offered to take me on as an intern, but train me for a whole year in their offices in Germany. So that was a good step in the right direction career wise. But outside, of the profession, just on a personal life basis, it was such an eye opener. This was the year where I realized how many things was I taking for granted, like family and friends being
Yeah.
close by when you need them. Even simple things like, the sunny weather in the month, the sea close by. Like, I think this was the year where I became much more aware of all of this and could reflect a bit deeper.
I totally relate to this actually. For you, it happened, I would say, a little late because probably you moved out during your job or later in the college. For me, it happened in early teenage. I moved out for schooling for a hostel, and there were same realizations that I had, and it got me thinking a lot about what I was taking for granted. So I totally relate, and that actually defined me who am I today. I'm much more grateful towards my parents and family that I have with me. Yeah,
Exactly. Exactly.
yeah. Totally. Rens, it's your turn now.
Yeah, I'm glad. I was thinking through this. It was an interesting question. I think I said me growing up. I grew up with my grandparents, right? And we had a farm, and I think growing up with them, obviously them being a bit older, I think they had there's. I think you get older, you get a little bit more sense of maturity, kind of thinking of the world, and seeing that at a young age, I think was really good for me because they were, in farming, there's lots of things that sometimes go wrong. There's floods, there's disease, there's
Yeah,
lots of stuff, but how they kind of approach things, like they're, they were never about let's blame anyone, let's do this, let's, really focus on, hey, let's stay calm, let's focus on solving the problem, let's figure it out, kind of staying positive. And I think that was really helpful for me. I think I'm setting an example. And really, the biggest thing they taught me was like, there are certain things you just can't control. Just focus on things you can control and worry about those. And 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 that's it. Really, be positive in a lot of ways.
yeah,
And I carry that with me a lot. I think there's a lot of stuff you can stress out about, but there's really so many things you can control and kind of let go of everything else. So I still
totally,
kind of keep that with me.
totally makes sense. I mean, people like you coming from humble backgrounds are more fighter in nature. They're more positive in lives. They're more optimistic towards such situations, and I've seen that in a lot of folks around me. Uh, People who are privileged do not really get to be that anti-fragile. When situations come, they break down easily. So I think that defines who you are. I totally relate to that. Perfect. Great. Thank you. Thank you for sharing this. All right, guys. I think now we will move on to the main section. Whatever this particular unlocking engineering productivity is about. Today's theme is around developer experience, and of course, the experiences that you both have gathered over your engineering leadership journey. So I'll start with a very fundamental thing, and I think we'll go with Rens first. So let's say Rens, we start. What, according to you, is engineering productivity? I mean, that's the very fundamental question that I asked on this episode, but I want to hear out, the audience would want to understand what is the perspective of engineering leaders of such high performing teams when they talk about productivity.
Yeah, I think a lot of ways. There's always the simple thing metrics. You're like velocity, things like that. Those are always good. Those are good to have. But from my perspective, and the way I think really good teams function is making sure the teams are aligned with business objectives, right? So what we're trying to accomplish, common goals, regardless of how big an organization is. I think if and it gets harder when you get bigger, obviously, right? It's like identifying the layers between your impact and then maybe the business is higher. Maybe it's easier for smaller teams, but regardless, I think that's always been what I've seen, that the outcome, linking to the outcomes that makes the most sense, and understanding productivity. So like, hey, these are what the goals are. I think OKRs work really well in terms of structuring that as a framework, right? But realistically, I'm saying, hey, here's what we as a team are trying to accomplish. Here's how we're going to measure it based on some sort of, whatever the business metric is or the key outcome is, and then let's work on figuring it out. And then basically how we do that is, okay, I think my approach has always been, this is what we want to do, this is what we think we need to do do it, and then what are we going to commit to, like what are we going to commit to, when are we going to get it done, right? And how well do we do to that, right? So I think that's how we tie it all together. So basically just getting us all aligned on objectives, right? And making sure the objectives have meaning to the team. Like it's always hard when people feel like, why am I doing this, right? And that's always the worst, right? But if it's clear that, hey, we know how this is going to make an impact on our customers or the business, and they can see it, but then aligning to, okay, we see it, we see the problem, here's a solution, we think it's going to work, here's what we're committing to fix it, and then it's really measuring, how well did we meet on committing, getting to that, did we deliver what we said we're going to deliver, to deliver it on time? Those are things that we kind of look at.
Got it. What do you have to say, Clint?
It's my definition is very much aligned. Like from a higher perspective, to me, it all boils down in how well are we and how well and quickly are we delivering the right value to the user, right? And this kind of if we drill down to this, this means like how quickly are we able to experiment and learn from that? Is our architecture allowing us to do that as quickly as we want? How well are we planning and executing on those plans with least disruption as possible, like being proactive rather than reactive to disruption? So there's a whole sphere of accountability that we need to take into consideration.
Makes sense. I think both of you are pointing towards the same thing. Fundamentally, if I see it, it's more about delivering value to the customer, delivering more value, which aligns with the business goals. And that totally makes sense. But what do you guys think when it comes to other peers, other engineering leaders? Do you see the same perspective about engineering productivity, Rens?
I think in general, yes. I think you end up, and I think sometimes you end up getting caught in, sometimes you get caught up in just trying to hit a metric, right, and then losing track of, are we working on the right things? Is this worthwhile? I think that's when it could be, maybe problematic, right? So I even in my career, this is where I've done that. Like, hey, let's be really as efficient as possible in terms of building a matrix organization, right? We'll do kind of everything's are small projects, right? And we'll get these things in really quickly. And I think that what I learned is in that situation, like, yeah, we're doing stuff, but then the team's not as motivated. It's not a collaborative. The outcome isn't going to be as good. Like, I think I think the really key thing is, from my perspective, is having a team that's engaged, right, and being part of the process and proactive, right, and obviously measuring to what the outcomes are. But that's where I feel it's great when we go to a retrospective or a sprint planning, where we're like, hey, teams are like, I don't think this works. Like, the worst part is when you get like crickets from people, like, okay, this is what we want to do, like, and no real feedback, right? I think I really look for, how engaged teams are, how in terms of solving the problem, right? And I think that a lot of that cross collaboration, right, and how and building a kind of environment where people feel empowered to kind of ask those questions, be collaborative, ask tough questions too, right? Like, I love it when an engineer says, this is not going to work, right? And it's great. I'm like, yeah, tell me why, right? So I think if we can build cultures that way, that's ideal.
Makes sense. Perfect. Clint, for you, do you see the same perspective, and how things get prioritized in that way?
I particularly love the focus and attention on the cultural aspect. I think there's more to it that we can unpack there. But yes, in general, I think actually when I heard this question, it reminded me of when I realized the needs of data points, not just for the sake of data points of KPIs, but what I started to see as the company started to grow is that without sitting down and agreeing on what good looks like, what are the data points that we're looking at, I started to see a close definition, but not exact definition, which still left openness to interpretation. And there were cases as we grew bigger and bigger, where, for example, I felt we were performing well, whereas someone else felt differently. And then you sit down and you realize, okay, this is the crux of the problem. So we need that was the eureka moment where like, okay, so this is where we need data points on team performance, on system performance, on product performance in general.
Makes sense. I think both of you have brought in some really good points, and I would like to deep dive into those as we move forward. But before we move on to some specific experiences around those pointers, Clint, in your journey over last so many years, there must have been some counterintuitive things that you would have realized now that are not aligned with what you used to think earlier. How productivity is driven in teams. Are there anything? Is that thing ringing a bell?
Well, if you ask me about learnings on things that I used to think are good for productivity, and now I think they're not, and I evolve them. I think I keep having these month in, month out, right? But again, the alignment on a key set of indicators rather than just a few was one of those big changes in my leadership career, because I went from using sprints as the only data points to then extending to understanding why the DORA metrics matter, why actually space matters even more, because they're the well-being factor and how engaged people are. So I realized that I needed to form a bigger picture of data points in order to be able to understand all the picture. And again, not just the data points, the quantitative data points. I also needed to fill in the gaps with the qualitative parts.
Sure. I think, that goes hand in hand. Alone, either of those is not sufficient to actually look at what's going on and how to improve on those factors. Perfect. Makes sense. Rens, for you, there must have been some learnings over the years, and anything that you find was intuitive earlier, but now it's counterintuitive. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think guys, learnings every day. But yeah, in general, maybe what Clint said, right? So I did end up at some point over-indexing on like some of the quantitative stuff, right? And it's like, and you lose track of what are you trying to do, right? So hey, we did really well. We, we're doing in terms of, we got through our sprints. We were getting to the, we're doing planning. Hey, our meeting times are low, right? Or these are so many things there's so many things you can look at, and then you lose track of the greater picture, right? So I do think of identifying those the North Stars, right? And I was referencing, right, those what we think are important, saying, hey, how are we measuring to that? And also that helps you make sure you're looking at the right metrics potentially, right? And putting them in the right context, right? So it doesn't matter if your velocity is great if you're not building the right things, right? It doesn't matter if you're so those are the things I think you kind of learned, like, hey, sometimes it's just simplify the what you want, what you look at, right? And try to think through like how are we as a team meeting that, and also kind of primarily from a team perspective, right? Getting alignment on that, like, hey, this is the goal we're trying to get to. And I feel like that's when you get most commitment from the team too. Like, hey, it's easy. I know what we're trying to do, it motivates people to be like, yep, this is what we're trying to get to. It's something to celebrate when we get to it, right? Otherwise, it just gets it's not hard. It's hard to celebrate. Like, oh, we got X velocity. I'm like, that's not right. So yeah, I think that's a bit of learning, simplifying, right, and also simplifying in a way, and then defining the metrics based on those core metrics, like and so they all flow down so that it aligns, right? And you can point to something easily and say, this is why it's important, right? I think that's really important when you communicate to people. Hey, look, this is problematic. We might need to take a look at this and be able to really simplify it. This is why it's important. This is why it's problematic. This is why it's going to impact our North Star, right? I think that makes conversations a lot easier.
Totally. Makes sense, guys. I think having the right direction along with whatever you are doing on day-to-day basis as KPIs is very important. And of course, to understand a holistic picture, to understand a developer's experience, a team's experience to improve overall productivity. Not just quantitative, but qualitative data is equally important. So I think to sum up both of your learnings, I think this is a good piece of insight. Now, we will jump on to the next section. But before that, I would like to tell our audience, that if they have any questions, we are going to have a Q&A round at the end of this session. So it's better you guys put in all your questions in the comments right now, so that we have filtered it out by the end of the episode. And moving on now. So guys, the next section is about specific experiences that we are going to deep dive into from Rens and Clint's journeys. We'll start with you, Clint. I think the best part about your experience that I have felt after stalking you on LinkedIn is that you have had experience of going through multiple acquisitions, and you've worked with smaller and larger organizations, high performing teams. Uh, this kind of experience brings a lot of exposure, and we would want to learn something from you. How does this transition happen, and in those transitions, what what should an engineering leader should be doing uh, to make it more uh, to not make it overwhelming, and to be more productive and do the right things, create the impact even during those transitions?
Yes, we've been through. I've been through a couple of interesting experience, and I think, like, I dare to say, for me, they were like, especially the acquisition where Hotjar got acquired was a very unique experience. Two big companies merging together. It's very easy for such a transition to be overwhelming. I mean, there's a lot of things to do. So I think the first key takeaway for me is like clear communication, intentional communication, regular, and making sure that as a leader, like, you're making yourself available to support everyone and to help to guide others along this journey. It's then there's the other side of it, that such an experience is does not come without its own challenges, right? The outcomes are big, and in engineering leadership specifically, you know that there's a primary area that you start to think about is, okay, the systems. What does it mean when we talk about technology stacks, the platforms? But I think something not to underestimate is also the ways of working and the culture when merging with companies, because I I started coming to the realization that I think there's more effort required in planning there than in the technology side of the story. So, very interesting experience. How to get the teams up and running? I mean, my experience last year was again, very challenging in a good way. I started in a completely new department with about 55 people. 70% of them were new to me, coming from the parent company. So we already had goals to deliver by June and by September. So yes, talk about overwhelmed. And I think one of the key exercises that really helped us start to carve out some breathing space was these iterations of higher level estimations of the things that we need to implement. They started immediately enabling us to understand if we needed to scope, if we needed to have discussions to either delay or the scope or bring more people to the mix. So, and following that, kickstarting, we needed to give some space to the teams to come together, start forming their ways of working. At the same time, getting a high level understanding of what we can commit to. And from there, it's all again about regular communication and reflections. It's like, okay, bi-weekly, let's have a quick update. And let's call a spade a spade. If we're in the red, let's call it out. We'd rather know early so that we can do something about it whilst there's time, rather than, I'm not sure if you've ever seen this situation, but you see a status in the green for almost all a quarter. All of a sudden, you get to the last 2 weeks and it goes to red. So
makes sense. While we were initially talking, you said there is a lot to unpack on the developer experience part. I'm sure that's something very core to you, your leadership style, where you ensure a good developer experience amongst your team. So now you shifted to a new team, and in general, wherever you have been leading teams, are there any specific practices around building a good developer experience that you have been following and that have been working for you? And if there are, can you just share something?
That's a very good question because I see different teams, right? So I've done different exercises with different teams, but in this particular case, where I started from was I realized that okay, when you have a new line being formed, mixed cultures coming from different companies, I said okay, the one thing I can start with is at least providing a community culture um, where people feel safe enough to speak up. Why? Because we have challenging goals. We have a lot of questions, a lot of areas that are known. If people won't be able to speak up, the probability of surprises is going to be much, much higher.
Right, right.
So what are some elements, some actions that I've taken to try and improve here? So I think when it comes to leading teams directly, in general, we find much more support because even if you look at the Agile Manifesto, it talks about a default team where you have a number of engineers, you have a trio, ideally, enabled to do decision making. There's a pattern of reflections that happen, as Ren said, in the retrospectives. Ideally, actions get taken. There's a continuous cycle of improvement. What I found interesting was that beyond one team, right, when I started to lead other leaders or managers, I could see a much bigger opportunity in this team of leaders or team of managers to actually work together as a team. By default, we're all kind of more focused on our scope, making sure that our people, are well supported and heard, and that our team is delivering. But I I think it's also worth thinking about, if we're calling it developer experience, let's call this the manager experience of how much can we help each other out? How much can we support each other to remember that we're people before managers? I don't know. It's not
Yeah.
the first time I went to work where I wasn't feeling so great, so I needed to fine tune my self expectations on what to produce. So if this is not shared outside with my lead, with my manager, or with my peers, their expectations cannot adjust accordingly. So there's there's a lot of this that I try to prioritize by simple gestures like sharing my weekly goals, trying to encourage my managers to do the same
Yeah.
so we can understand if we're trying to take on too much. An end of week reflection. Think of it like a retrospective, but between managers to say, okay, hey, there was much more disruption than I anticipated this week, and it's okay. You know, Part of it is actually the psychological safety of being able to say, oh, I shot for 100%. I only achieved 50. It's okay, but I learned, right? And I think in terms of metrics, another exercise that I immediately tried to restart in my new line was this exercise that I call the high altitude flight. And this was
Okay.
an exercise where, as leaders, we connect those KPIs with qualitative data, like the weekly pulse and feedback from 15.5, for example.
Yeah.
And we talk about it on a monthly basis. We bring those data points on a board, it starts asynchronous. We raise the right questions, challenge each other out. And this way, we were regularly bringing those data points into the discussion and making sure we're prioritizing some actions towards them.
Totally. I think after talking to so many engineering leaders, one common pattern that I've seen in some of the best leaders is they 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 over communicate, like in a very positive sense. I'm saying this, they tend, because everyone feels that a lot of times you're in a hybrid culture, in a remote culture, where as much as you communicate is less actually. So having those discussions, giving that psychological safety has always worked out for the teams, and I'm sure your team would be very happy in the way you have been driving things. But thanks for sharing this experience. I'll get back to you. I have a few questions for Rens also on this note. So Ren's journey has also been very interesting. He has been CTO at Prendio, and recently I was talking to him about some of the recent initiatives that he was working on with the team, and he talked about some uh, Copilot and a few other automated code analysis tools that he has been integrating in the team. So Renz, could you just share some experience from there and how that has impacted the developer experience and the productivity in your teams?
Yeah, happy to. It's been think there's a lot of change happening in terms of capabilities with AI, right, and how we best utilize it. So, like we've definitely seen it, as models have gotten better, right. I think the biggest thing is we have a relatively large code base and newer code base for things, and so it was always good for like maybe even like 6 months ago we would say, hey, we can look at some new code, we can improve it, write some unit tests, things like that, but having an AI that has like a really cohesive understanding of our code base and be able to, um, you know, have it, suggest or build code that would work well, it wouldn't happen, right? But now it is, right? So I think that's coming probably the biggest thing we've seen in the last couple of months, and really changing, how we think about development a bit, right? Kind of moving. We've done some, a lot of this is AI first development, like it's a change mindset for us as a team, right? Like how do we build it? Lots of new tools. I think Kovid, you mentioned there's tons of new tools available.
Yeah.
It's changing constantly, right? So we've spent some time looking at some of the newer tools. We've actually agreed to, I think, as of now, a tool we actually going to move everyone over to Cursor, right? Because I just on terms of like what the capabilities it provided and that. So and then similarly outside of code, yeah, it's like there are tools that Typo has the for the pull requests, the summaries, things like that's really helpful, right? For things like that, even on the and then automated testing. There's a bunch of things that I think are really changing how we work and make us more productive, and it's challenging because it's obviously, and it's good. It's a lot of new stuff, right? And it's really making us rethink
Yeah.
how we do it. Like you know, developing. So we built some things now from an AI first approach, right? So we have to kind of relearn how we do things, right? We're thinking
Yeah.
things out a bit more, like defining things from a prompt first approach, right? What are our prompts? What are our templates for prompts? Like it's been really interesting to see and good to see. And I think it definitely made us more productive, and I think we'll get more productivity as we kind of embrace the tools, but also kind of embrace the mindset. It's I think for the folks for who's actually used it as most, and you can kind of see like when they first start utilizing it to maybe where they're now, like the productivity increase has been tremendous. So that's probably the biggest change we've seen recently. But it's an exciting time. We're looking forward to kind of learning more, and it's something that we have to, we really have to get a better understanding of. But again, it's also like challenges too. I would say that too, right? So, like previously, we had a
Yeah.
good understanding of what our velocity would be. I mean, right now it's maybe a good thing. Like our velocity might be better, right? And it's higher. So, like, even gauging effort, things like that. It's a lot of new things that we're going to have to learn and figure out and reassess. But um, but yeah, I mean, I think if I look at anything that's been different recently, that's been probably the biggest thing and the biggest change for us in terms of how we work, and then also in kind of making sure that we incorporate that into our existing workflows, our existing development structure. I think it's a lot of new changes for our team, trying to help us do it if effectively, and making sure we're thinking about it, but also like giving our team power to like try new stuff has also been really cool too.
Perfect. Perfect. And my next question is actually to both of you. You both are trying to implement, let's say, AI. Think you're trying to implement a better communication, better one-on-ones, bringing that psychological safety. Everything that you guys do, I'm sure you both have some way to measure the impact of that particular initiative. So how do you guys actually measure the impact of such initiatives or such let's say AI tooling that you bring into the picture? Maybe Clint, you can go ahead.
I don't have examples around AI toolings, and in general, it's more about utilizing actually deciding which of those KPIs are we actually optimizing for this quarter. So
Right.
I'm guessing, for example, in Ren's case, we were talking about how much AI already is influencing productivity. So I would assume or expect a pattern of decreased cycle time because of the quicker time to implement certain code. I think the key part is something that Rens said a while ago, is not focusing a lot on the KPI per se, just for the sake of that KPI, but connecting it even in the narrative, in the communication, when we set the
Right.
goal with the teams. connecting it to the user value. So for example, some experiences I felt, okay, I had an interesting experience where I did exactly that. I just focused on the pickup time without a user connection.
Mhm.
And this is where I got the learning. I'm like, okay, maybe I'm optimizing too much about the
Yeah.
data points. Whereas eventually we started shifting towards utilizing MTTD, for example, to reduce the impact of service disruptions on our customers by
Makes
detecting
sense.
disruptions internally, using SLOs to understand proactively if we're eating too much into the error budget. So we actually act before an incident happens, right?
Right.
So it's different data points. And
Situations
when
from,
going
yeah.
back to the well-being, what I found very interesting, I know that there are the engagement surveys that happen every 6 months to a year, usually. But because of that time frequency, it sets well-being as a lagging indicator. When we started utilizing um, 15.5, for example, there are other tools like it, but the intention is for every one-on-one, weekly or bi-weekly, you fill a form starting with how well did you feel from 1 to 5. Because we were
Right.
collecting that data weekly, all of a sudden, the well-being pulse became a leading indicator, something that I could attribute to a change, an intentional change that we decided to do in leadership.
Makes sense. Rens, for you, I think the question is pretty simple again. Like you're already using Typo, right?
We are, yeah.
I will just rephrase my question to ask you, like, how do you use such tools to make sure maybe your planning, your execution, or your automation, or your reflection is in place? How do you leverage that?
Yeah, and I think it's maybe Clint and I saying the same thing. I think in aligning those to what the objectives are, right? So I love this. I know primarily the sprint retrospective, like, but not the detail, like more on just as a collective team, we said, hey, this is what we're trying to accomplish. This we have a plan to do this. We've agreed to, hey, this is what we have to get done for these next couple of weeks to make it right. And then it's really having the all that in one place to see, like, we said we need to get all this stuff done. We this is how we did, right? So there's multiple tools to put together. We have ticketing with Jira. We have obviously Git to kind of get all the controls, but then having all that merged into one place, we can easily see, like, okay, this is what we committed to, this is what we did, right? And then basically being able to say, okay, okay, one, okay, here's where we are. What do we need to do to kind of problem solve? Are we behind? What should we do? Right? Having those discussions is great. And then also being like, okay, well, and so then and can we still meet these goals that we want to do from an objective perspective? What's holding us back? I think getting to the point where we can have those conversations easily, right? That's what the tools, and for Typo, that's what we really use it for, right? So instead of because it's the context that all those individual stats provide, right? That's more important, and that context towards how does that, at the end of the day, that aligns to what our overall goal is, right? We have this goal, we're trying to build this or change this, right? And for our customers or because of a reason, and being able to see like how we're doing to that, right? In a good summary is what we find the most useful, and then so we can take action on it, right? Otherwise, if we sometimes you look at all the individual stats and you kind of you lose track of it if you just look at those individually, but if you have a holistic view of here's how we are doing, which we use it for, that really helps.
Perfect. Perfect. Tim, do you have anything to add on to that?
Not specifically, not this stage.
All right, perfect. I think thanks both of you for sharing your experiences. Now I think it's time for us to move on to the Q&A section. And I already see we are flooded with a few questions here, and we'll take a minute's break right now. And in the meantime, I'll just pick on the questions that we need to prioritize here. All right. All right. So there are some interesting people here who have come up. Clint, I'm sure you have already seen the name. Paulo, the guest from the last session and one of our common friends. I just pull up his question first. So I think this question, Clint, you can take up. Engineering productivity is a lot about the relationship with the product. As senior engineering leaders, what does a great product lead look like?
Very good question. Hi, Paulo. Well, I've seen a fair share, right, of good traits in product leads. It's not me, right? No.
That's not
Okay.
you.
Yeah.
I think what I can speak for is what I tend to look for. And first and foremost, I tend to look for in a partner. So I really know the vision, because that division easily gets downstream. You start to see that division happening in the teams as well. There's the secondly is in the alignment of objectives. So I always tend to lean on my product counterpart to understand more about the top priorities of our product goals, and I bring, which would answer some of the questions here, I bring in the picture the top technical solvency challenges in order to sustain those product goals. And this way, we find a balance on how to set up the next set of goals for a quarter or half a year, right? And we build together a narrative that we can share both upwards and with the rest of our teams. And another characteristic, yes, is regular, is actually the teamwork element. A while ago, I explained the differentiation, the opportunity I've seen amongst team leads or managers to work together as a team as well.
Yeah.
I think the way I like to see it is, as a leader, you have at least three teams. You have the people that you work for, that report to you. You have your trio as another team, and then there's the managers in the department, the other leaders in the department, which is yet another team. So in the product lead, I do lean on for one of my teams to be one of my team peers.
Makes sense. Perfect. All right. Moving on to the next question. That's from Vishal. What are some of the best practices or tools you have found to improve your own productivity? Rens, would you like to take that?
Sure. Trying to think. I there's a lot of tools. Obviously, I think at the end of the day, more than anything else, I would say communication is the biggest thing, right? I would think for productivity,
Yeah.
from a team perspective, like I've I've worked in a lot of different types of places, from really large enterprise companies to really small startups, right? And I think the common thing, regardless of whatever tools we do, is really, one, how well are we connected to what we're building? How well do we as a team understand what we're trying to build and the overall objectives, right? And I think that just, that itself, more than anything, is what drives productivity. So, like, I think the most productive I've ever been is, I was in a startup. We were we had this one small attic space in our city, we were in Cambridge. There was five of us in one room, for like, we were constantly together communicating. And so and then we had a shared vision, right? So we were able to do a lot of stuff very quickly. I think what I look into is some of the tools that maybe help us now. It is challenging, I would say, with everyone being remote, right, distributed. That is probably one of the biggest challenges I have for productivity. So, trying to get everyone together. Video calls are great. We try to make sure everyone goes on video, but, like, at least, try to get as much of that workflow of thinking through, like, being together, even though we're not together, as much as possible. I think that helps a lot. And
Have
tools that,
you
you know,
have you tried those digital office tools, like you are virtually in an office?
yeah, we tried that. I think it's okay. We tried some of the whiteboarding tools as well, right? It's
Again,
yeah, quite, and it's honestly, it's good. Um, but the interesting thing I've really found, and if possible, even if we met one person live in person even once, right? I feel
Yeah,
like the relations between the teams are so much different. So no matter what, no matter how far away, we try to get everyone together at least once to meet, because it's just I think even like how people's expressions are, how they are in real life, it is so hard to replicate,
totally,
right?
totally. Yeah, yeah,
And those nuances are important in terms of communication. So but outside of that, I mean, yeah, I think whatever the things that I would say are the things that can simplify objectives, right? Make sure it's clear. Anything that would make that easy and straightforward. I think that's the best. And then it's making sure you have easy ways to talk to each other and communicate with each other to kind
sure.
of yeah, keep track of what we're doing.
I could see a big smile on Clint's face when I talked about this virtual office tool. Is there an experience that you would like to share, Clint?
Not really. Like it was fun to hear the question because I've been wondering about it as well. But I have to
Oh,
agree
okay.
with Rens. I think nothing beats, the change that happens after an in-person meetup.
Sure,
The
definitely.
relationships that get built from there are take a different, a different go to
It
a
is
different level.
different, yeah. I don't know why, but if I've met someone in person for, I feel like I feel like I know them at a much deeper level than
Agree.
even though we're uh, on video for a long time. It is a different experience.
Totally. I think there is another good question. I think you both would relate to it. Have you guys had an experience to work with the Gen Z developers recently or in last few years?
I I mean, I probably I'm trying to think through, like what Gen Z would be. Yeah, like in
I
Because
their
mean,
face.
I get that in my circle a lot, that dealing with the Gen Z developers is getting a little hard for us. And there's like almost 10 to 12 years and maybe more age gap there, and things have changed drastically. So people find it a little hard to understand and empathize on that front. So do you have anything to share? By the way, this is a question from Madhurima. Yeah.
I think, well, I think in general, I think I will just say maybe not maybe Gen Z, but just in general for more junior developers we bring on board, like younger developers. I think it has been challenging for them too, because I think a lot of it's been remote. A lot of their experience have been remote, right? I think it is
Yeah.
harder to acclimate, and that a lot of the stuff I've learned when I remember coming up as a software engineer, and that's a lot of that experience has been like getting in, meeting with people, whiteboarding, getting through that, right, and having those relationships was really beneficial. So I definitely think it's harder in that sense. I do think we've personally tried to get people who are more junior developers, try to more opportunities to more coaching and also like more one-on-one time, just to try to help them acclimate to that, because I think we've identified that it is harder, especially if we're being
Mm.
remote first. Um, I haven't had any. I don't think anything. Yeah, I know the memes of the Gen Z developers. I haven't got any meme worthy stuff or experiences for a Gen Z developer. It hasn't been that. So maybe I've been lucky. So, but I do. But I would empathize with that. It is harder for junior devs because we are in a much more remote world, and it's harder to make those
Yeah,
connections.
totally. All right.
I think uh, if
Yes,
I
please.
may add something to this, I maybe what I'd add is I don't have a specific way to deal with Gen Z developers, because what I try to do is I try to optimize for inclusivity. Okay, there's Gen Z, but there are many other, cultures and subcultures that require specific attention. So at the end of the day, what I found to be at least the best way forward is a strong set of values that are exemplified, that comes from the company, consistent way of sharing feedback, and the guidelines of how feedback is shared. And of course, making space for anyone to be heard in their preferred way, they like to communicate. And you can easily understand this if, as just a part of your onboarding, you ask people to provide a user manual for you to understand how is it the best way, for these people to communicate, to get the feedback. So think of it this way. It's like, okay, providing the support for interfaces which are consistent for everyone, but then being available for everyone to communicate and get the support the way they prefer it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. All right. Thanks, guys. Moving on to the next question. This is from Gaurav. How do you balance short-term deliverables with long-term technical debt management. Also, how to plan them out effectively while giving some freedom to the engineering teams, some bandwidth to explore and innovate and delve into the unknowns. Clint, would you like to go first?
Sure. When going through this question, the first thing that came to mind, something that I want to be clear, I'm not an expert on, but I started, trying and iterating upon, is the definition of an engineering strategy. Because this is exactly what I used to try and understand. So there's the book, Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. So I try to replicate the tips from there, and it's basically getting a diagnosis of, okay, where's the money coming from? What are our product goals? And there are other areas to cover, and then coming up with policies, guiding policies, so that your team knows the direction we want to go, and some high level actions that could be really and truly could become projects or goals to be set as OKRs, for example. I don't know. We realize the need from the diagnosis. We realize the need. We need to simplify our architecture, for example. So then I connect that engineering strategy and actions to goals, so that the teams have enough freedom to choose what to tackle on first, whilst having enough direction on my
Makes
end. So
sense.
I'm still fine tuning on how good that strategy is, right? But it really helped me there.
Perfect. The other part of the question also mentions about giving engineering teams that bandwidth, that freedom to innovate and delve into the unknowns. So, of course, one part of the question does get answered from your strategy framework, but in that, how much do you account for the bandwidth that teams would need to innovate and delve into the unknowns?
I can delve into that or decline it. Either way, I think
Yeah,
Go.
no, it's an interesting point. Like, we look at it. I think in general, like we define it like an overall architecture. We try to, for everything we do, like here's our high level where we want to be from a technical perspective, right? And then whatever solutions we're trying to do, we always want to try to get to that. But there's always these, with the short and long term, and how much do we give engineers ability to innovate. We really look at it this way. There, if it's something we need to do right away, and we say, hey, look, and then and typically if someone has a really great idea, and then it's like, let's do it. I think our overall question is, okay, worst case scenario, how long would this take to completely redo to get back to our architecture, right? And if it's like, hey, it's not gonna increase in complexity to redo this a year from now if this is the wrong mistake, right? We're much more lenient towards, let's try something, let's do this, right? If we think the worst case scenario, it's not going to be exponentially worse if we put this in production to roll this back, right? And so if it's something that is going to say like, oh, this is going to lead us down a path where if this is going to be, we're never going to be able to fix this, right? Or it's going to take us so much effort to fix it, then we're much more careful, and we're like, well, let's see, we might not want to give as much leeway there. So that's kind of how we balance it out typically.
Makes sense. Perfect. Moving on. Probably the last question. This is from Mosher. What's your approach to balancing new feature development with improving system? I think this is what we have already taken up. Do you have practical guidelines for deciding on when to prioritize innovation versus strengthening your foundations? Mosher, I think we just answered this question in the previous question. So we'll give this a pass for now and move on to the next question. Okay, there is another one from Paulo. How much of engineering productivity do you attribute to great engineers versus how work and information flows among individuals? So, Rens, would you like to take that?
This is like a yes and yes. Like, I mean, yeah, I think really great engineers have really great productivity, right? It's a both thing, right? So if you have, like I think we kind of seen it from more experience, like even on the recent stuff on the AI side, like we playing around with folks who really have understood our like really solid understanding of our technical infrastructure, but can learn to use those tools effectively. Their output is like maybe 10x. But if someone who's not as solid on like maybe some of our existing code based technical understandings, and utilizing it is it's still improving. It's like maybe 2x 3x, right? So you definitely see that difference, and I think that's important. But I think the other part about that is communication between the teams and how you do it, and making sure that, similarly, going back to productivity, like are we building the right things, right? We can build
Yeah,
a lot of stuff very quickly, but it might not be worth it if we don't communicate well. We're probably building completely different things. So I think it goes hand in hand. I don't think there's a really way to. It's not an or. It's really an and.
perfect. No, I think it's well answered. Team, do you have anything to add here?
It's very much in line with Rens, I think. And even in fact, the KPI suggests looking at the holistic of a team. So whilst I do believe that, great engineers, the experience and engineer brains will make a difference. It's not the first time I've also seen great engineers not compatible with a team, and it doesn't work out. So you start to see that the productivity is not really improving. So yes, you need great engineers, but there's a very big emphasis. I think it's beyond 50-50. I think there's a bigger emphasis, in my opinion, on the ways of working, the respectful ways of working. Small details. I don't know, like when should I expect my teammate to pick up a pull request during the sprint? How do I make it easier for them? Should opening a pull request with 50 change files, embedding, refactoring with a bug fix, does that make it, small things?
Yeah,
But I think this is where you can reduce a lot of friction and bring more harmony.
right. Makes sense. Guys, I think we are already done with our time today, but I feel bad for other people who have put in questions. So I just want to make one more. This sounds interesting. Are you guys okay to extend it for like 2-3 more minutes?
Sure.
Perfect. This question comes from Nisha. How to align teams to respond to developer surveys and use engineering metrics to improve overall experience and performance. So I think both of you have some experience here. Clint is already a promoter of having communication, having those one-on-ones with teams. So, and for Rens, I know he's using Typo, so he's already into that setup where he's using engineering metrics and developer surveys with the developers. So both of your opinion would be great here. Rens, would you like to go first?
Yeah, to Nisha's question, I've never had good luck with surveys and with like
Okay.
developers. Quite honestly, they're just not. I think a lot of it is time spent, and I try to do one-on-ones with people, and just get an understanding of how people are doing. We've try to do surveys, and it's people, it becomes, people aren't, I don't think the responses get less and less valid in some ways if it becomes robotic in a lot of ways. So I really think, I think aligning to how people are doing, it's, from my perspective, is really more hands-on, more one-on-one discussions and conversations.
Makes sense. How did that work for you, Clint?
What Rev just explained resonates with a lot of my experiences in the past. It was a different and eye-opening experience at Hodja, where I've seen the weekly use of such a survey being well adopted. And when I joined Hodja, I joined as an individual contributor, as a front-end engineer. So the first time I had to fill one of these forms, I was like, okay, I have to do this every week. But the thing that made me change my mind was the actions I was seeing coming out, the benefits for me that I was seeing coming out from my lead. This wasn't just a form. This was becoming the talking point of the 1-hour session I had with him every week. Actions get taken out, which were dedicated to me. So for the fun fact, this was the first remote experience for me, but the one-on-ones felt like the most tailored I've ever had. So
That's interesting. Yeah.
If I can sum up around the developer surveys, I understand that the less people can attribute their input to actual outcomes, to actual change, then why spend the effort? So on my end, what I try to do as much as possible is not just collect the data. Here's a summary of the points. Here are some actions which are now part of the strategy. Remember the connection of the strategy. And here's
Yeah.
why when we are trying to attack what. So again, not a silver bullet.
Yeah.
And then the second part on engineering metrics, I think here I really rely on engineering leaders to be the glue of bringing
Okay.
those data points into the retrospectives. So the engineering managers are best positioned to connect those data points with the ways of working and the patterns seen throughout the sprints. And in an end of sprint review, express, okay, here are the patterns that I see. Let's talk about this. Let's celebrate this because it's a huge milestone.
Makes sense. Great. Rens, you want to add something?
No, I would agree. I think that's a good call out. Yeah, getting maybe having more action oriented from the surveys would provide different results. And we tried something where we try to do our one-on-ones as a daily survey.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was successful because it didn't. I think people weren't seeing that individual response back from them. Right. It was just more like data collection for data aggregation purposes,
Yeah.
which wasn't people didn't seem to value it.
Perfect. Thank you so much, guys. This was an amazing session. Thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing all your thoughts. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, to talk to folks like you who are open, take out time from their busy schedules and give it for the community. Thanks once again.
Thanks for the invite.
Yeah.
And nice to meet you,
Okay.
friends.
Same here, Clint.
All right, guys. That's our time. Sign off for today. Bye-bye.